All right, welcome to Legal Tech Week for April 2nd of 2021. This is the program in which we talk about the week's top stories in legal tech and innovation. I am Bob Ambrogi. I have the blog Law Sites and the podcast Law Next. And I feel like it's almost redundant for us to keep introducing ourselves, but we'll do it anyway, because why not? People should know who we are. So going from my upper left, I don't know how you see it. Molly, that would be you.
Hi, I'm Molly McDonough. I'm a media strategist based in the Chicago area, and I'm former editor and publisher of the ABA Journal.
And Nikki?
I am Nikki Black. I am the legal technology evangelist with My Case Law Practice Management software, and I am a legal tech journalist, and I write regular columns for the ABA Journal, Above the Law, the Daily Record, which is a legal newspaper here in Rochester that's syndicated nationally. And I also write weekly posts for the My Case blog.
All right. And Victor, who is here to speak officially on behalf of the ABA, right?
Yeah, sure. The American, American Basketball Association. We have a 3-pointer. We have a red, white, and blue ball. It's going to be awesome. It's going to put the NBA out of business. Now, my name is Victor Lee. I'm associate managing editor for the assistant managing editor, of the ABA Journal. I manage the Business of Law and Technology section.
Joe Patrice.
It's so sad this wasn't on April Fool's Day, because I could have come up with some long bio that wasn't true. But I'm Joe Patrice. I'm the senior editor at Above the Law. I work on the Thinking Like a Lawyer podcast. I just generally talk about tech and these days bonuses. So if you're looking for how much people are getting paid at law firms, that's what I'm doing day in, day out.
Yeah. Do you remember when we all used to do people do that anymore? Used to do April Fool's blog posts and all that. That used to be a thing.
Yeah. Our editorial mission has always been to pretend that it doesn't exist. Elie Mystal always hated it. He thought that it was the worst day on the internet because people would send us lies as tips, and you had to parse through whether it was happening or not. He hated the whole thing. So we took the bold stance that it did not exist.
Yeah. There was one year when I got a lot of crap from people. I don't think I ever did it again, but I posted, I said, I pretended I had a guest post from a Barack Obama. And for some reason, everybody thought it was actually Barack Obama guest posting on Law Sites blog. And I was like, yeah, right. Okay. I got a bridge in Brooklyn, I'll sell you too. Steve. Oh. Sorry.
Sorry. I was looking at the squares thinking I wasn't next. Sorry.
Well, I guess
Steve Embry.
We all see the squares in a different order here.
Yeah, I guess that's right. I write the blog Tech Law Crossroads about legal innovation, legal technology, and various and sundry things. I practiced law for a good number of years before that, and I'm also vice chair of the ABA Law Practice Division, and any opinions that I announce are strictly mine and not theirs. Or something like that.
Yeah, okay, last but not least, Victoria.
Hey everyone, my name is Victoria Hudgens. I'm a reporter with Legal Tech News, where I cover cybersecurity and the legal tech industry.
All right.
And I don't want to buy a bridge in Brooklyn.
Okay. And I guess I didn't hear from Zach. I guess he's not here. Caroline, apparently it's a holiday in the UK. I didn't know that. So she's not here today. Joe, you haven't been around for, yeah.
Yeah, no, I haven't. I'm excited. I did see that Zach said he wasn't going to be here somewhere in the mix. I haven't been. I'm super happy to be back. I assume that we solved all the problems with legal technology for over the last couple of weeks. So
I just want to get caught up on are we down to the final four yet?
We are in the final four. It is the cat filter. So yes, this is the Above the Law epic Zoom fail bracket, where you can vote for what the most epic Zoom fail of the legal year was. The cat filter is obviously the 1 seed and has rocketed all the way to the final four. The 2 seed, meanwhile, is Jeffrey Toobin's fall from grace, shall we say. It's the 2 seed. It also has been, it had a rough go in the first few rounds, but it's now now coming along. We're going to see some real barn burners this time around. So be sure to get your vote in.
And when do we get down to the?
I believe that's actually what I'm looking up now, because I feel as though I didn't memorize this. I think it's Monday, but let me make sure. Final four square off. Yes, Monday, April 5th. It'll be Still Not a Cat versus the Peru case where there was a lawyer having sex on video during a drug lord's trial. And then Tubin is taking on that actually more serious story, the scary story of the abuser who was in the room with the witness at the same time, and an eagle-eyed prosecutor managed to catch them. And yeah, keep your voting April 5th, and then we'll that night will be the actual men's tournament final, and then we'll vote for over the rest of the week for the final of our Zoom one. Keep the party going,
Awesome. So while we have you, do you want to talk about your pick of the week here?
Yeah. So this is a story that I've written but have not published yet, because I think 5 firms have announced their bonuses today. So it's taking up our whole editorial calendar. But interesting, buried in the stories of people getting new bonuses and all are some stories. We've been talking about people working from home for a year. We've talked about the legal technology rising to the occasion and lawyers becoming more comfortable with it. And we've talked about, I think Steve had the story, that Cushman story about how new leases, as they're coming up, just generally commercial real estate is shedding office space, getting rid of square footage because they feel they don't need it in the modern era. And we've started hearing cryptic saying they're considering it. No one has actually announced a plan, but I have heard from people at 2 big law firms that their leadership has said that they're looking into creating a model that does not require you to come into a 5-day in-office work week anymore. They're talking about institutionalizing basically 3-day weekends. Now it's lawyers, so that's really still a 7-day work week, but ones where you can do 3 of the days in sweats. So that it's an interesting that we've crossed this threshold, that people are actually mulling it over. That's obviously different than them actually doing it, but it suggests there's some momentum. And I think everybody, those firms are not Cravath or Davis Polk or any of the ones that you would expect to be a first mover, but it suggests to me that they're starting to float this, hoping that one of those people that everyone feels comfortable following takes action first.
Yeah, I saw a story today, I think it was today, that Womble Carlisle, the North Carolina, is it Greensboro, is cutting their office space pretty substantially. And I thought it was kind of interesting because I'm not terribly familiar with the firm, although it's a North Carolina-based firm, at least originally, and probably more on the conservative end. But when they were describing it, I thought it was kind of interesting the way they described what they wanted to do is kind of conceptually, just the office space was going to be a place to come and collaborate and have meetings and have training sessions and sort of everything else you do from home, which is a different way of thinking about a legal office than ever before. So that was kind of an interesting take.
Yeah, we're starting to hear, I mean, there's been a couple of companies in the tech space, not legal tech space, not legal at all, but a couple of the big tech companies that have basically said, look, we're never going to tell you have to come back in again. If you just want to work from home for the rest of the time you work for us, that's fine. And, why shouldn't that start to drip over into legal?
Of course, then there's Amazon, which said everyone must come back.
Right.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it kind of flies in the face of what we talked about a couple weeks ago when the ropes and grades sent around that memo saying we want everybody back in the office. And I mean, yeah, I guess, on the one hand, it's like, yeah, you have these big firms that have this like really fancy, expensive office space everywhere. It's just like, well, why wouldn't they want to use it? And why wouldn't they want people to come back? And especially if they want to like, keep tabs on people and make sure that everyone's, at their desk or in their office at a certain time or whatever, it makes it easier to do that, right? So it'll be interesting to see who wins out, or if there's going to be like some kind of compromise to see like, if there's some kind of hybrid method going forward. But yeah, I mean, it just seemed like on the one hand, there is a strong force saying, okay, well, let's just get back to normal and do everything the way we used to. And then on the other hand, it's kind of like, well, can we?
You know, and it's going to have enormous repercussions, not just because lawyers may decide not to go back downtown, but, I live here in Louisville, there's been substantial investment in downtown over the past several decades. And most of the businesses that are down there, by and large, depend upon office workers for their sustenance, from lunches to retail to what have you. And, those office workers are no longer there. Boy, it's going to be kind of strange. It's already strange here. I mean, so many downtown businesses, mom and pop, locally owned businesses are just gone. And so it could have a lot of repercussions across the board that we probably haven't really fully appreciated yet as a society.
Yeah. Victor, this kind of relates to the story you had wanted to talk about this week.
Yeah, it's just interesting because one thing that and this is kind of like a compilation of like, we did like a compilation of like stories that other people had talked about with regards to, law firms kind of going all out to try to recruit associates, which, seemed kind of, I mean, you talked about like some firms are trying to really get on this virtual bandwagon and be like, okay, well, we're gonna hire people, hire the best people in whatever city, regardless of where they are, set them up remotely, and then have them work that way. Or we'll give out these big bonuses to people to entice them over to our firm, or we're going to do this and do that. And it's just like, first of all, it's like it just made me kind of wonder, like, okay, where's all this money coming from? First of all, I thought we were still kind of recovering from like this, from a downturn in the economy. So it's kind of like, well, where's all this money coming from? And haven't we learned a lesson from like giving out these big guarantees in the past, and kind of like, trying to entice people to come over by giving them, all this money up front, and trying to not having them really kind of prove that they're worth it, or making them bring in business to a company with it. And it's just like, yeah, it just seems like it's I don't know if it's going to create another bubble, or if it's going to do anything like that, but it just seemed odd that there was all of a sudden like this big arms race for associates. Not even, I mean, the articles talked about associates, not even partners. But I assume that it would apply to partners as well. But yeah, it's just all of a sudden these firms just trying to pick off people from other firms, and promising them everything under the sky. It just seems like that doesn't seem like the best way of going about doing things.
Well, I mean, a lot of these firms are saying they've had one of their best years ever over the last year. So I don't know how that adds up, but that seems to be what they're saying. What else we got? Victoria, what do you got this week?
Yeah, I wrote about this week about legal tech companies and why they rarely go public. And it stemmed from last week. I spoke to contract life cycle management provider Ironclad when they announced their acquisition of PackSafe. And the CEO, he said, like, you can quote me, Ironclad will go, we will file an IPO. We're in the business of acquiring companies, not being acquired. And I was just kind of like, okay, that's kind of interesting. Just looking into the history of legal tech, you don't see too many companies that's taken that step. And I reached out to some legal tech investors, and they were kind of mentioning why, you'll see successful legal tech companies. They're successful companies, but they don't necessarily have the cross appealing usage or cross like outside of legal departments, and they're not like a department company wide tool. And that's why when investors, when they're looking for that multi-billion-dollar investment, they don't see it in legal tech because it's not necessarily usable outside of like just lawyers using it. So that was interesting, and I thought it was a little bit interesting that the companies that have said publicly that they are interested in going public, they have been like, they're legal tech companies in the CLM, contract life cycle management sector. And it's interesting because like we have seen consolidation in that part of legal tech, and also like investments. And they were just kind of saying like, I think Jason from Ironclad, he said, like, I think we will get to a point where there'll be at least one legal tech company throughout the entire industry that is public. But contracts is kind of like, if you can, contracts are impacted not just by like the legal department, but you're also HR, sales, financing. People want to know what's in those contracts. I think that's why they were saying like that might be the industry that you might see a little bit more of those types of companies going public. So I thought it was interesting. And of course, the time will tell, like, will those companies actually go public? Will they be successful? Like, there's been some companies that did do it, and just to kind of see like how the industry is maturing and if it'll get to that level where you'll see them exchange on like stock exchanges.
I think it's really interesting. We talked a little bit about this last week too, but I've also, like you said, they're all in the CLM. I've also talked to the CEOs of Agiloft and Evisort, who also both say, watch for us to go public within the next 5 years, if not sooner. And it is interesting that it's all happening in the CLM space. You kind of wonder if there's a bubble in that space, what's going to happen, because there's just so much money going into that space, so many different startups in that space, and not just startups. I mean, Agiloft is a 30-year-old company that's just took its first major investment ever over the past year. So it's a hot market. What happens with it, I don't know.
Yeah, I always think about when DocuSign, like a company, I think people that don't even follow legal tech, they've heard of DocuSign, and them buying Sill, like a contract analytics provider. That makes me kind of think like, yeah, maybe there is like a market, outside of just like the legal when it comes to like contracts, if you can get the whole entire cycle, even down to like signing it and everything. So there is maybe like an opportunity for it. Will it be like that $1 billion company? I don't know, but it seems like it does kind of like have a demand like in companies, and even like for consumers, individuals that aren't part of a company.
Right. Well, Ironclad does have a valuation in excess of $1 billion, right? I forget what they reported, but something up there.
So that makes me wonder, with a story you're going to talk about, Bob, about the VC investments in tech justice spaces, if you can find ways to partner and scale or bring together these universes of technologies to create these larger offerings in a public setting, if that is more attractive to investors.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that, I think what's attractive to investors is kind of like what Victoria's talking about, which is the fact that the fact that it's not just a legal product per se, although that it spans different sections of the corporation. I mean, it makes some of these people I talk to who work for some of these CLM companies say they're pitching their sales as much to the people in the sales department as they are in the legal department, and sometimes the sales department is their inroad into the legal department to get a bigger deal with a company. So I think that's a major force there. Our thoughts on that? Since you brought it up, I might as well talk about that story you mentioned. I just thought it was really interesting that there was this report that came out this week called Justice Tech for All, how technology can ethically disrupt the U.S. justice system. But it was really focused on this sector called justice tech. Some of you listening here probably know like the company Paladin, which is a pro bono platform for law firms that expressly positions itself as a justice tech company. But this report was really interesting because it really kind of mapped out the landscape of what's going on in justice tech. And it's a lot broader than legal tech. I mean, it's all focused on, well, how did they define it? Their definition is justice tech refers to technology-enabled innovation that supports people affected by the U.S. criminal and civil justice system and their families and the organizations that serve them, from initial interception by law enforcement to incarceration to reentry. I don't really like that definition because it makes it sound very criminal focused, and it's not just criminal law. It's clearly civil and criminal. And that's what's interesting about the report is the tech isn't just legal tech. It's healthcare tech. It's financial tech. It's communications tech. What else do they? Future of work tech. I mean, a lot of it is focused on the criminal justice system, in that a lot of it is focused on helping people who have been in the criminal justice system get back into work, or, get their financial affairs in order, or whatever else. But it's also tech as simple as things like this one e-court date, which basically helps courts message with people through text messaging, and to make sure they show up for their court hearing on time, and that sort of thing. But what was interesting about this report is it was compiled by a couple of VC firms that focus on this sector, and it was really addressed to other VC firms to encourage them to invest in this sector. Something I don't think it addressed very explicitly is what the potential payout is for VC firms with this kind of tech. A lot of these companies do tend to be smaller, but then again, some of them are getting to be pretty significant and have had some pretty significant investment. So that was really interesting.
And that's what I was thinking too, because of the way that they identified these areas with financial, future of work, and government tech. It reminds me a lot of the civic justice projects that are happening, these marriages of civic tech and justice tech. But those are all nonprofit. And this is really focused on for-profit capabilities in this space. And so that's really interesting. And that's why I thought of it when Victoria was talking, because, these are things like business formation. These are, really getting into some of the automated processes that can be more attractive to, larger groups across the country that may be able to scale to something that would be more attractive in a for-profit company.
Right. And they make the point that there is foundation support, there's institutional support for nonprofits that are developing tech in this area to some extent, although even those institutions, from my experience, aren't putting a lot of money into tech as much as into direct services. But there's not a lot of people putting money into the for-profit side of this sector. Any other brilliant observations about that? All right, Molly, since you were just talking, then I tag you.
I don't have too much. My head has been in the clouds in San Diego on vacation, and head down on another project I've been working on. So I haven't been focused enough in this space lately.
You can tell us all about the project you've been working on.
I did get to read over the Florida bar's best practices for remote proceedings, and it's a lot of common sense. I laughed out loud when I read on the first page. One of the main points is to make sure you mute yourself when you're not speaking. It starts off with dressing appropriately, which is that's something that I'm hoping to write about soon about court etiquette via Zoom. So I thought that was interesting. They didn't get really down into the weeds with that one, except to say that the people running the proceedings and bringing in clients are responsible for making sure all of their associates are appropriately attired. But it talks through, it gets into really detailed specifics, including how much notice you should give people, making sure everybody's aware that the proceeding is going to be video, and I thought it was nicely done, comprehensive piece. If anybody's looking for a guide,
yeah, a little more comprehensive than the one Nikki talked about last week with the New York judges, where it was like 5 sentences basically. That similar said, dress appropriately, and that was about it. I will say I had some meeting with some state legislators today via Zoom, so that's why I'm wearing a collared shirt as opposed to a T-shirt. That was my nod to getting dressed up.
Well, I mean, with lawyers, you always got to put them on notice, right? Because otherwise, I'll be like, "Well, you didn't tell me that I couldn't wear a tank top and
and have sex under my desk."
Yeah, I mean, there's no law saying I didn't. You can't. I can't do that. So how would I have known, right?
Right.
Yeah. I will say, not commenting on the sex under desk one, but which lost in the last round of our
I'm
bracket.
amazed.
Oh, I mean, it lost to the Peruvian video, which is a little bit more explicit and
Okay.
during an insane situation. I mean, that was a tough matchup. 4-5 though. I did a great job seeding this tournament. Is all I'm saying. But on that dressing up thing, I actually wonder if this is a kind of like a hidden headline that we should focus on, which is, what about these lawyers who litigators, they still show up in Zoom hearings and stuff, but some of these corporate folks may never have had to dress up at all in their careers. And I'll tell you, I had to put on a suit for the first time a couple of days ago, and it does not fit the way that it did a year and a half ago. Thankfully, in the good way, my pants continually tried to fall off of me the whole time. So I basically had to tie a burlap rope around myself like Huck Finn or something. But it was brutal. And I wonder whether it's that good way or the bad way, how many people are on the back end of this pandemic are going to need their suits redone.
There is a story for an investigative journalist to go out.
Oh yeah, no, I'm gonna start. Yeah, that's a good thing. I'm gonna start calling some tailors and seeing like if they've seen an upswing in appointments lately.
Yeah. I mean, is a related story though whether dress codes change even for professionals kind of forever. I mentioned on here before, I'm an arbitrator and I do Zoom arbitrations, and I've been noticing, attorneys in those arbitrations who would never come to a live hearing without a suit on if it's a man, or a woman dressed professionally in some way. They tend to not wear those. They might just have an open collared shirt on without a tie or anything else. It's much more relaxed, it seems like. And I don't know, does that forever change dress codes, or do we, once we start doing things physically again, do we all start trying to remember how to tie a tie again? I don't know.
I think in court, at least, they're still going to have the same standards in court, but whether it's going to be casual Friday every day in law firms, or just when you're going to have clients come in, is that when you have to dress up, or are they going to require it all the time because people see you when you walk around the office, even if you're not seeing a client? I don't know. It's an interesting question.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be a little looser.
I've seen over the years just a difference in dress code, for example, in depositions. When I was a younger lawyer and you took a deposition or defended it or you wore a suit and tie. And, before the pandemic hit, most of the depositions I would go to, in-person depositions, very few people wore ties. Sometimes the witness would, if it was being videoed, and he would be of the type of witness that you would expect to wear a tie, which is not many anymore. But most of the lawyers, would have a collared shirt on most of the time. It kind of looked like Bob, sort of business casual, as you would say. And so it's that's evolved over time, and I think kind of a good way, to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
Of course, I can also remember the day where everybody smoked in depositions. So that's also a very good thing.
That is still possible. And now it is possible to smoke in your office and smoke during your depositions and smoke during court. So and drink.
And today now it's going to be possible to smoke in New York.
That's right. I'm following that closely. I'm so surprised it even passed, which is a whole different issue, but hard to believe that New York got it together and did that. Weren't you surprised, Joe, or no?
You're surprised it passed? No. New York was always going to pass it. It was always going to get through the Assembly and the Senate. It was just going to die on Cuomo's desk. But somehow, for some reason, I don't know what it is, I haven't really been following the news, Cuomo feels like having something that distracts attention is important. I've not heard anything about him, though, so maybe I'm missing it.
So you think that's what made it happen?
Yeah. This isn't even the first time he's done that.
I like that.
He's opened up over the course of several years. He's chosen to do something whenever the heat gets a little too close on him. Like when he closed the Moorhead Commission, what is that? What it is? I'm now blanking. Is that Moreland? Whatever. That commission about ethics that ended up sending his chief of staff or whatever to prison. when he tried to shut that down because the heat was getting a little too close, he immediately did some crazy thing that he'd been holding up for years, so everyone would talk about how great he was. No, he's cagey like that. He knows how to manipulate the media. Yeah.
Well, that's a typical political response, right? I mean, Trump was the master at it, and then just this week with the Florida congressman, it's just it just so happened to leak that day that he was considering leaving Congress early to go take a job at Newsmax. Well, now we know why he's considering leaving Congress early.
All right, Steve, what do you got this week?
Yeah, well, I had listened to a podcast by Marlene Gaybauer and Greg Lambert, the Geek and Review podcast, which is
my second favorite.
Always really enjoy listening to, and was fortunate enough to be on every now and then. But they interviewed a woman who was the head of a practice group in a law firm, and the interesting part about it was this woman did not have a JD. She was a business person. And it struck me, they sort of laid out the responsibilities of practice group heads, and for that matter, the chairman of a firm. I mean, it's develop an overall strategy, advance business development, make sure the work is distributed equitably, find lawyers that are having trouble and come up with a way to help them. When I was a practice group head, I also had to monitor the financial performance of the practice group and come up with budgets, and at the same time practice law. And it's kind of therein lies the rub. First, most of those, if not all of those, except for practicing law, are not things that our lawyers are particularly qualified to do. Business people, on the other hand, typically are. What we are qualified to do is practice law, right? And so you start putting lawyers, and it's often lawyers with very big books of business in a lot of law firms. Let's face it, that's who carries the cloud and becomes a practice group leader or firm chair. So you take these very qualified lawyers, force them into a role where now they're going to have to try to do something they're really not trained to do very well. And then tell them at the same time, keep practicing law. That's kind of what I was told. So now you've got this kind of choice, do you spend your time working on firm matters, trying to do something you don't really know how to do, or do you spend most of your time doing what you really know how to do, which is practicing law and develop business and that sort of thing? And in many cases, the answer becomes obvious. Most of these leaders spend more time and energy practicing law and less time managing the law firm. Or conversely, they decide we'll spend more time trying to do what we don't know how to do, which is managing a law firm, managing a very robust business, and less time doing what I was once doing, which was very qualified to do. And as a result, you take out of circulation, a key revenue generating person to try to cram them into this role of business management in it. None of which makes a whole lot of sense until you start thinking about, well, what's the business model for most law firms? And it is a partnership with no non-lawyer ownership. And so, management lawyers in a law firm are typically like, well, you may be the chief executive officer, but I'm the person that's got everything at risk. I mean, it's my partnership, it's my money, it's my debt. And as one of my partners, who I will not name, used to say, when he was hit with some bureaucratic requirements, he would say, I'm not going to do that. I pay your salary, for God's sake. So, it kind of perpetuates itself into this sort of lackluster management of so many law firms. And it just struck me as I was thinking through those qualifications. They're all of a practice group head or a firm chair, or even somebody running a legal department in a corporation. I mean, they're business responsibilities and business obligations and things that business people know how to do. And yet we sort of keep plugging along, we can do, we're lawyers, we can do this. That business stuff's easy, right? We can handle that. So I thought it was just kind of an interesting sort of phenomenon that, at least in this one firm, they had decided to make a business person responsible for our practice group, and seemed to be working pretty well.
Is there a parallel there to the rise of legal ops and corporate legal departments? I mean,
Oh, yeah.
I think one of the reasons legal ops has
Yeah.
become such a powerful force in the legal world is that they are business people. They understand processes and workflows, and they are able to bring those to a legal department. You know, they don't have to be lawyers. Maybe some of them are, and probably some of them are, but you know, it's all about bringing business methods to the running of the legal department.
And you know, I postulated in the post that, you know, a business person could run very successfully a legal department, and where the lawyers would report to the business person, because many of the things that legal departments do, process management, human relationships, determining, you know, the best fit for various types of pieces of work, are things that could be better done by a business person. And if that were to occur, it gets you out of this sort of, I want to say maybe good old boy network, where so many general counsel come from law firms and tend to adopt that as models. And in fact, there was an article that just a few minutes ago I was reading that, you know, many of the corporations are hiring fewer law firms, but the ones that they're hiring are the ones that they have long-term relationships with. And from a cost, you know, analysis, that may not be the best law firms for them to be hiring, right? Because they're very expensive and they're very well known, and you're sort of over lawyering many of the problems, unless they're bet the company problems. So, you know, I've often thought what would happen if you had a business person running a law firm who would look at something like that and say, I'm not sure our mix and who we're using these very expensive law firms is quite right. It doesn't make business sense, right? So,
right.
You know, maybe someday it'll be interesting.
Yeah.
Someone who understands law firms running a law firm, understands business running a law firm. No. That's crazy talk. Come on now. No. They because what would a lawyer running a law firm do other than complain that they didn't go to law school to do this job? You know, that's 90% of their conversation.
Yeah.
But you make a great point. Now, what I actually thought was interesting about that, well, all of it, but the thing that I zeroed in on was your point about clients transitioning back to law firms that they have long-term relationships with, which is a different narrative than we've been telling
right
5 years ago. Like, I remember writing a bunch of stories about 5 years ago about the professionalization of clients and how they were walking away from the long-term relationship and increasingly taking a real hard look at, hey, this isn't bet the company. I'm going to hire this smaller firm that is cheaper and more efficient, and the jobs and beef up my own in-house and take a lot of this stuff in-house, and therefore not do that. And that was really the theme a few years ago. But, you know,
yeah,
things have changed a little bit. Conditions are different, and maybe they're running home to the old ways.
Yeah, I mean, I was surprised to see that too. And again, it makes, except in a bet the company case, it just doesn't make economic sense. You know, I mean, you don't go out and you know, buy Cadillacs to, you know, deliver, you know, goods in or something. I don't. It's just, you know, but that's the legal profession.
Yeah. Well,
did I cut out at any point there?
No.
Okay, good. Well, you all cut out audio, and I was like, oh, did something break? But apparently it wasn't that. Anyway.
No.
I just want to, before we move on from this topic, I do think it's interesting that, so we're starting to see law schools address this on the technologist front. So with courses and tracks, not quite tracks, but close to tracks on developing skills in legal technology through law school. And I haven't seen that same development of business skills other than through clinics. And I'm wondering if undergrad and law schools and business schools are putting their heads together to develop these pathways for professionals for law firms. It makes sense to me. I don't know that it's really happening. I'm seeing lots of really expensive LLMs and other advanced trainings, like you're paying for a law degree to not make as much as a lawyer working in a law firm. But I'm not seeing, the law schools really rethink how these specialties in law practice or in running a legal business might play out.
Yeah, it's interesting, Molly. I have a nephew, and he went to Penn, and he got a combined MBA and computer engineering degree designed to do just what you've been describing. And now he works for Google, and probably makes more money than all of us put together. But in any event, I thought that was interesting. That was 10, 15 years ago that was being done. And like you, I've not heard of that. And it's really kind of sad in a way, because a lot of the lawyers that really need that kind of business training end up working for small firms or going solo, and they're just thrown out there. Many of them don't even understand financial statements and those sorts of things. And it's a real shame that most of the lawyers that come out of law schools end up in those kinds of jobs as opposed to Biglaw, which has enough problems in that arena of its own. But we're really depriving them of a way to sustain themselves in a lot of ways.
Yeah, there are a couple of law schools that offer joint JD MBA degrees, but they're not a track to run a law firm. It's a different kind of a track.
I was going to say Enron had Biglaw lawyers, so even they don't understand how financial statements are written sometimes.
Yeah.
Or maybe they really did.
In our next issue, we're actually kind of looking at that issue of whether or not, because obviously, most big firms, they have some kind of CFO or some kind of person there, maybe with a law degree, maybe, but usually on salary, who's there to run the financials of the firm and whatnot. And obviously, with a lot of small firms and solos, the attitude is, well, I can't afford to hire a CFO, or what's the point? This is my practice. I need to do it myself. And, ultimately it's okay, well, do you really want to spend all that time trying to learn how to run a business, and probably, takes time away from your practice, and maybe even, detract from it. And maybe, you don't do it as well as a professional could, or do you want to just bite the bullet and hire a CFO? And so, obviously, more and more small firms are starting to do it, and I think it's probably worthwhile to at least look at it. And obviously, look at what's happening in Utah and Arizona. Hopefully, at some point, we'll see some results of these new structures and how they can kind of bridge that gap, so to speak.
Yeah, I think that would make a huge difference, because now if you could have non-lawyer ownership and business people in that role, then that everybody comes to the table sort of equal. We're all in this together, as opposed to lawyers over here whose money is all at stake, and business people over here whose all they have at stake is their salary, which is not insignificant, but still it's a little different than being responsible for profits and revenues and debt. So
yeah, for my podcast that's coming out on Monday, I interviewed Andrew Ballheimer, who is the former global managing partner of Allen and Overy, who just joined the board of Factor, the ALSP Factor, the managed services firm Factor. And a lot of people kind of wrote about that move as perhaps symbolizing this sort of bridge between traditional law practice and new so-called new law. But he talked a lot about kind of the symbiotic relationship perhaps between ALSPs and traditional law firms, where they can work together to serve the client, kind of in the way, Steve, that you were talking about, where they come to the law firm for the high end, the thinking stuff, the really skilled stuff. But then the execution of it, you work with a managed services firm to do it. Like a great example was Allen and Overy and Factor worked together on this LIBOR remediation project. So, the Allen and Overy attorneys kind of did did the big level thinking about what needed to be done there. But when it came down to the sort of rote mechanical execution of that, it's not just rote and mechanical, but to the more commoditized execution of that, then you work with a managed services firm to kind of carry it all out, and the clients benefit because they get that high level legal skill, but then they don't also pay an arm and a leg to a big firm to do all the execution of it.
Yeah, and I think, Bob,
Victoria,
that's going
did
to
you
be
have something to add? I noticed you had.
I'm sorry.
It feels like it was like 15, 20 minutes ago, but just kind of like what Joe and Steve were saying about kind of, these corporations, corporate legal departments say like, hey, we want more efficiency, technology. And I was speaking to a service earlier this week, and he said, yeah, these corporate legal departments make those announcements, but then in a lot of corporate legal departments, they provide like autonomy, and like individual in-house lawyers can make those decisions on who actually works on certain matters. And a lot of times when you look at who they're hiring, it's not necessarily that they're efficient, or they're not necessarily following like diversity announcement that the corporation makes. And it's just kind of like, oh, we had this previous relationship with them. And that kind of trickles down into if law firms see that, hey, I don't really need to be efficient, I just need to have this relationship with the client, and that gets me the work. Then it's kind of like, okay, we see these corporations, they're saying they want more efficiency, but when law firms are actually getting kind of creative and using technology, if they're not being rewarded by it, by actually, getting that work, then you'll kind of see like, you won't see as much like evolution in law firms and corporate legal departments, because the GCs aren't demanding of their in-house lawyers like, hey, no, I want you to look at this other firm that's pitching, that's trying to get our work more closely, looking at them more closely.
Good point.
All right. Anybody else have anything else they want to talk about?
I do.
Did we not do yours? I thought we did yours.
No. What I thought was interesting, no worries. What I thought was interesting that caught my eye this week was an ABA journal story, and I will paste that in the chat. And I really liked it because it covers this intersection of everyone getting vaccinated and remote testifying remotely in virtual practice of law. And so essentially it was about a class action, and the defense counsel, which was a school, was trying to allow its witnesses to testify remotely. And the plaintiff's counsel said, listen, everyone's getting vaccinated. They need to, I would like the judge to inquire as to whether they're vaccinated. And if they are, then what is it that they're necessarily worried about in terms of coming in and testifying in person? Because testifying in person provides a more, it's just a better way to cross-examine someone and elicit testimony. And I thought it was really interesting because we're at this like point in time where people are getting vaccinated, and some people for strategic reasons are going to prefer remote testimony and are probably going to try to use that as a wedge in a case. And plaintiff's counsel was having none of it and saying, listen, if they're vaccinated, they're going to have to explain what they're actually nervous about because the vaccines are so effective. And otherwise they have to come and testify in person. And I just thought it was a real interesting sort of point in time that this issue is being used, and it's a strategic decision. So I just wanted to, I posted in the chat, and I thought it was really interesting and wanted to highlight that.
All the more reason not to get your vaccination card laminated, Steve.
Yeah, Nikki, it's an interesting point because, in addition to sort of the safety sort of concerns about coming to testify, there's the disruption and cost concerns. If you have an expert that's across the country, having that expert come and testify in Louisville, Kentucky could be phenomenally expensive because you got the travel to and from, and then you've got this sort of, you never know exactly when the expert's going to go on the stand, right? I mean, it could be 10 o'clock, it could be 2 o'clock, it could be tomorrow, it could be next week. And that's one piece of it. And then in smaller cases, you have, even parties, but certainly witnesses that, they'd be much more willing to testify if they could do it in a more convenient sort of sort of way. So it's kind of like, how do you balance this sort of need to get the testimony in with convenience and all of that? I tend to think, you know, the in-person interaction deal is maybe a little bit overblown in a lot of ways. And I think there's some research that would maybe support some of that. But certainly the inconvenience of having to, an expense of having to testify and appear live is pretty significant when you think about it all the way around.
Yeah, I wonder if some people would just say that's like private health information and I'm willing to testify, just not go into the courtroom or to the deposition where we're having it, like, you know, like that's personal information. You know, I know with Nikki, you're talking about like maybe it could be like strategy or something like that, but I could see maybe some people saying, well, that's personal health information. Like I'm willing to testify, you know, I'll just do it remotely or something like that. So I can see some people just having a little bit of pushback of like, you know, I'm still willing to do it, but, you know, I'm not willing to give up like my health status or vaccination status to just go in person to do it.
You know, and there's another piece of this I just thought of, you know, in civil litigation, you know, there's a great reluctance by courts to call chief executive officers to testify. I mean, the CEO of Google has more important things to do than come and testify, mainly because of the disruption. But I wonder now that it's easier to testify, whether we'll see some sort of loosening of the judicial reluctance to make those kinds of people appear before juries or appear before judges because of it's much more convenient now. That'll be an interesting fallout, I think, will come from all this.
I think it's I think, Victoria, you raised a really interesting issue, and I wonder if it'd be like an in limine issue, like they'd have to tell the judge in limine, because the argument was that they're uncomfortable testifying in person for safety reasons. And so they're just sort of calling their bluff and saying, listen, if you're vaccinated, how worried can you be? But then I also, that's a good point in terms of not wanting to publicize your health status. And then Steve raised the point that I hadn't really given too much thought to, but in terms of, but that I think is really interesting as well in terms of strategy from a cost perspective. You know, the defense attorneys are usually billing by the hour, and all the costs are being passed on either to the insurance company or to the client. And then plaintiffs don't have to worry they have to worry because they're fronting the cost, but at the end of the day, hopefully they're going to recover a lot of that. But there may be a little bit of a back and forth there in terms of trying to make it more expensive to defend the case, because usually the case gets to a certain point in terms of how expensive it is to defend it, and it will cause the defense to reconsider negotiating a settlement. And so I wonder if there was a little bit of that in play as well, in terms of trying to get all 15 witnesses to come and testify in person and the expense that's associated with that, as you've mentioned. So I just think it's interesting, though, that to see the sort of intersection of the vaccine and virtual testimony as we're starting to phase out of the necessity for virtual testimony, and then how they're using this sort of strategically, presumably, within this litigation.
So Nikki, do you think that that's a kind of a dangerous ploy, especially if in the next case it works for you the other way to have your folks come in remote? So and you're already on record opposing that vehemently.
Well, the class action, you're going to have to assume, I think, that I would think the likelihood that it's going to be in front of that particular judge in that particular court is not all that likely. But but these days everything is available through Pacer and through all the AI analytics software. So I assume that information can be dug up pretty easily compared to the old days when you didn't know as often. So that's a really good point. I think you're taking a risk when you do that. But then again, you may just be assuming you're going to get to a point where remote testimony is just not a necessity, and it's almost like a luxury. I don't know.
As a local reporter, I would be very happy to point those hypocrisies out in coverage.
Well, hopefully, see, this is why we just need to get rid of legal technology that makes it so easy for people to find this. The harder it was, the easier it was to defend clients. Legal tech, you're destroying our ability to advocate zealously at all times.
Public information was not public.
And yeah, well, I mean, public information still, at least at the state level, we've had this conversation on this show before. Go back and listen to some of the archives about how public information still isn't public in certain states, like being able to show up on a Tuesday with a form in triplicate in order to see a public record is not really public.
Yep. All right. Anybody have any quick rants or raves they want to throw out there? We're just about out of time here, but anything really piss anybody off or make anybody really happy this week? No?
I'm very pissed off that my DoorDash delivery guy destroyed my mailbox as he dropped off my dinner last night.
What the heck was in that bag?
That'll do it.
I don't know, man, but of course, as my legal mind immediately goes to like, independent contractor, insurance. How's this going to work? What's DoorDash going to say?
And so you just
So we will see.
Send them away. Yeah.
My rant is for those of us on the East Coast. We alluded to this before we started recording. The Mother Nature giving us like 75-degree days and then making it snow. It's just kind of cruel and unusual punishment, but we're all probably used to it on the East Coast.
Yeah.
I even have the fire going because it's so cold. I hope this is the last one I have to make until our fall episodes.
Yeah. So there's a chance next week's episode of this show will be a special one. I don't know if we've all agreed on that yet, or if we figured out for sure if we can do it. Nikki, you want to fill us in, or do you want to?
Sure. Bob and I are going to test it ahead of time to make sure it works. But the Monroe County Bar Association, which is my local bar association, is hosting a solo and small firm conference. It's their 4th annual one, I think, on Thursday and Friday afternoons next week. And because I was part of the planning committee and because I'm a freak about Avatar conferences, I somehow managed to convince them to try the Avatar conference for the solo and small firm
I don't know how you
conference.
did that.
I'm trying, I don't know. And hopefully it will be successful. It's a big hurdle to try and get lawyers to create avatars and run around in a virtual environment. But my hope is we have a lot of people registered, so we're excited. And because there's so much room on this virtual campus, my thinking is that we can all, and we've all been invited. I made sure that everybody here was invited in case they're interested in exploring the campus, but we can hold our webcast, our weekly roundup, as avatars in the on the campus. And then what Bob would do is share his screen to Zoom and then broadcast it so that we would all be speaking as avatars instead of little Zoom squares next week, as soon as it can be done. So that's our hope, assuming it can be done. And Bob and I are going to test it out hopefully early next week and see.
So we'll either be here as avatars or as whatever the heck we are now, talking heads. And either way, we'll be back next week. I think that does it for today's show. Thanks everybody for listening and watching and participating. See you then.
Bye all. Have a good weekend.